Hi everyone, and thanks again for joining me. So in one of my recent videos we talked about some simple musical intervals, but of course the situation can be a lot more complicated than that. There are major intervals, there are minor intervals, there are diminished intervals, augmented intervals, and those are the ones that we'll be talking about mostly today. So for most of the rest of this talk we will stay in the key of C major. Things will be much simpler that way and much easier to visualize. But of course everything that we'll be talking about will be true for any key that we may be dealing with. You may recall from our previous video that some of the intervals that we'll be talking about are perfect intervals, and we'll be talking about those separately from the others. So again, you may recall from our previous video that when we go from, say, a C to a D, right, there are two notes involved, 1, 2, and we simply call that a second. Now in this particular case, that is called a major second. Okay? Now, another kind of second that we may deal with is called a minor second. If the second note is 1/2 step lower, which would bring us to this black note, a D flat, then the interval becomes a minor second. Maybe it's easier to see with this hand. This is the smallest interval that exists in Western music, at least in equal temperament, and that is also called a half step. So a half step and a minor second, same thing. Let's go back to our original. We have a major second. If we want to increase that second by 1/2 step and play the D sharp instead, we call that an augmented second.
So when we go to notation, this is what we're talking about. Here's our major second, C natural and D natural. If we lower the top note, the D, to a D flat, we have a minor second. Again, a minor second is the same thing as 1/2 step. Excuse me. If we go the other way, we start with the C and the D. If we take the D and raise it by a half step to a D sharp, then we'll have an augmented second.
Okay, now we move on to a third. There's our third. You may recall it from our previous video. That is a major third. Very similarly, if we decrease the higher note by 1/2 step and play the E flat instead, that becomes a minor third. Now you may notice this looks the exact same as the augmented second, and in fact it is. If we want to go the other way and go from our major third to an augmented third, then we end up here.
Here we have those same thirds. Here's the major third, C natural to E natural. Again, if we lower the E to an E flat, then we'll have a minor third. By the way, this will be pretty much the same as an augmented second. If we go the other way, and we raise the E by 1/2 step to an E sharp, then we'll have an augmented third.
Okay, remember we're going to deal with the perfect intervals separately, so we're going to skip over the fourth and the fifth for the moment. Let's go right to the sixth. Same as before. In its original form, so to speak, it's a major sixth. If we decrease the top note a half step, minor sixth. If you go the other way and increase it by a half step, we have an augmented sixth.
And here's what they look like on the staff. Here's our major sixth up here. C natural and A natural. Again, lower the sixth to an A flat, and we have a minor sixth. If we instead raise the A to an A sharp, we have an augmented sixth.
How about a seventh? This is a major seventh. If we decrease it by a half step, we have a minor seventh. Technically, if we augment the major seventh by a half step technically we could call this an augmented seventh, but 99 times out of 100 we'll simply refer to this as an octave, as an eighth.
And here we have a bunch of sevenths, as seen in notation. Here's our major seventh up here. Same as before, lower the seventh by a half step. Lower the seventh by a half step to get a minor seventh. Go the other way to raise it a half step, and we'll have an augmented seventh. Okay,
let's go to our perfect intervals. We talked about a unison before. To the best of my knowledge, there's not really any such thing as a changed unison. A unison is a unison, and we never change it. As soon as we change it, it becomes something else. Okay, so let's go to our next perfect interval. That would be a perfect fourth. If we decrease the perfect fourth by half step, we're not going to call it a minor fourth. For being a perfect interval, as soon as we decrease it, we call it a diminished fourth. And you may notice it looks and sounds very much like our major third, and in fact it is. Let's go back to the major, to the perfect fourth. If we increase that interval by one half step by going up to here, then it becomes an augmented fourth. Okay, very similar for the fifth. Here's our perfect fifth, diminished fifth, back to perfect, and then augmented fifth. And for our octave, perfect octave, diminished octave, and then augmented octave.
I'm only going to show one of our perfect intervals because, as we saw with the other intervals, the changes are all pretty much the same. So here's our perfect fifth, C natural to G natural. If we lower the top note, the fifth, by one half step, it becomes a diminished fifth. If we go the other way and we take that fifth, the top note, and we raise it one half step, that becomes an augmented fifth. And that will be just as true for the other perfect intervals, namely perfect fourths and perfect octaves.
Now, of course, any of this will work in any key we choose. What happens if we choose, say, B flat, the key of B flat? Let me move the camera a little bit so we can see that bottom B flat. Okay, that'll help. So if we go to, let's say, the third note of the B flat scale. So here's our major third. Similarly to what we had in C major. If we decrease that by a half step, which would bring us to here, then we have a minor third. And let's do one more, say the B flat, a sixth. There's a major sixth in the key of B flat. Going from B flat to G is a perfect sixth. We can decrease it a little bit to make it a minor sixth. We can increase it a little bit to make it an augmented sixth. So it'll work in any key that we may select.
So as we said, this whole system will work no matter which note we start on as our bottom note. In this case, we're using B flat as the bottom note. We're thinking like we're in the key of B flat major. Here we go from B flat to the sixth note of the scale, and that will be a major sixth. And as before, if we take the if we take the top note and we reduce it one half step, that'll become a minor sixth. If this were instead a G sharp, and therefore had raised it one half step, this would become an augmented sixth in the key of B flat.
So if anyone has any questions on any of this, please leave me a comment and I will try to answer as many of them as I possibly can. So thanks again for joining me today, and we hope to see you again next time.